But yeah,
Okay, you're up, Quilly. It's all yours.
thanks. Okay, hopefully everyone had a great break. And hi, everyone. Today I'm going to be speaking about finding a publisher, especially from my perspective as an independent visual novel studio. And before that, I'd first of all really like to thank Aggie for organizing this conference. I've been attending for a few years now, and I think it's really important for our community. So thank you. Now I'm going to introduce myself a little bit. I go by Quilly in the developer world, and I'm the head of Quill Game Studios. The earlier talk by Maxi actually about solo developing really resonated because that was the mode of operations for my first game. I wrote the whole script, programmed the whole thing, and I directed it. But now I've moved to more of a directing and programming role and started hiring contracts to do the writing for my future games. To give a little bit of background of my experience shipping my first game and finding a publisher, I first self-published this game, A Summer with the Shiba Inu. So I didn't have a publisher initially, and I did that for Steam. And actually, on Steam, it's still self-published. It's just published on consoles by Ratalaika Games. So on Steam initially, it didn't sell well. At the time, I just had like I don't know some dollars. It wasn't enough to cover costs at all at the time. And then a few months later, after the original release on Steam, I reached out to the publisher Ratalaika Games because I was thinking about going on consoles. After hearing that they had ported One Night Stand, the visual novel, and we hopped on a phone call. And then fast forward a few months, or I think like more close to a year, but just under a year. The game is on all console platforms and it sold much, much better than it did on Steam and fully covered all costs and much more beyond that. So, here I'd like to share what I learned from the process so that you can apply it to your situation if you've been considering finding a publisher. So, of course, when having a game publisher, there is a division of work. There are things that I, the developer, will do and parts that the publisher will do. This will differ a lot from publisher to publisher, but I think by even sharing this, I hope it can give you some insight into this process because a lot of us are small devs or studios, and it's just like such a mysterious process. So for my case, the publisher focused on these three things, which really helped me. The first is the technical porting. So I was the only coder for the PC Steam version. But for the console version, the publisher provided additional coding personnel, and I acted more as a consultant and approver. I'll dive a bit more detail on this situation later. The second that they did was handling the publishing. I mean, yes, they are a publisher, but this includes like navigating a lot of bureaucracy and paperwork, which I wasn't able to do. And the third was marketing, like making use of the publisher's network that I did not have. And they had channels to send review keys to influencers that they built up over the years. And I'm a small dev. I am a small dev, and I don't have that. So, as a disclaimer, which you will see pretty frequently in this talk, this box here, there's a heavy dose of it depends. And I know the next talk is from a publisher's perspective, right? Sekai Project. So I think our two talks could complement each other quite well and cover examples that I have not covered from my perspective right here. So yeah, to bring it back up to a broader situation, like why would you want a publisher in the first place? It could be for the following three reasons. I do encourage you to think about why you want to find one. Here are some examples. There's the partnership aspect, which could include financial support, right? That's pretty enticing. In the end, it's not that one party is fully serving the other, but it's a mutually beneficial situation. I can't stress that enough. So I encourage you as a dev to think of yourself as being on equal grounds. It's a partnership. The second reason is expertise. So, for example, you can draw on the publisher's technical expertise or their knowledge of navigating different markets. So, for example, as a small dev, I didn't have the know how or resources to do ERSB ratings, which is like this age rating required to be published on consoles. So, like age ratings for movies. I didn't literally had no expertise, no knowledge in that, which the publisher provided. And the third one is delegation of work. So the publisher can take on less risk um, if you are a developer that they trust from your track record or your pitch. So you can share the risk and they can work on things that you are good at, such as they are good at, sorry, such as the market expertise part. And then you can focus on what you do well. So let's say story writing and game programming. So you're not torn in multiple directions. The good delegation of the work between these two parties can help with that focus. So I think it's a partnership and kind of work delegation as well. So, with that background, I've broken this talk up into what I learned in this whole process. The first one is checking out the publisher's portfolio. Second one is the collaboration between the two parties, and the third one is the kind of financial slash legal distribution. Disclaimer: I'm not a lawyer, by the way. So yeah, now let's get into the first point, which is the publisher's portfolio and the audience fit. So when looking around, there are several options for visual novels in particular. I'm not going to name them in this talk exactly for the sake of helping you apply these principles to your own situation. But the first principle actually is to consider the portfolio of the publisher. In my case, my game has a bunch of dogs. So I actually did apply to Sekai Project at one point in time, and yeah, I wasn't accepted, but I understand why. It's not like I'm trying to name them, like it's all chill. But it's just an example that I wanted to bring up because it's not about like, oh, I've seen Sekai Project publish visual novels. This will be a great fit. Like I mentioned earlier, finding a publisher is a mutually beneficial partnership. So there should be a match or both parties will be miserable. It's not about like me like needing to get approval somewhere. When looking at a publisher's portfolio, if they have more like anime girls and all their girls of their games are about anime girls, and my game is something about dogs, then it might not be a good fit. So for your situation, do more browsing and don't only be set on a particular publisher because you've simply heard of them or played games they publish. Right? It's fine to apply randomly as a moonshot, as with my case, I just kind of applied because it didn't take me too much effort. But don't narrow your options prematurely. So the second point is to consider the publisher's perspective. And this highly relates to the pitching part as well. In publishing a game, the publisher does take some risk, and therefore, whether a game is a good fit or not could be a matter of simply their risk tolerance. So, just to elaborate a bit more on what that means, I was a dev that hadn't really shipped anything commercial before. So actually any publisher that would have taken me would have had probably a pretty high risk level, right? Because I didn't have a record yet. Or they might agree to a project that is a bit outside of their typical portfolio and genre, but that also increases risk on their end. So one thing from my perspective that I could do to lower the risk is I took on the risk of completing the game in the first place. So there was no ambiguity about that. So that probably contributed to my game getting accepted by my publisher, Rata Laika. For developers that are pitching just an idea or maybe just a vertical slice or a demo, right, like a way earlier stage of development, that brings higher risk to the publisher. That is true. In terms of when you enter the agreement, there is a reduced probability that you two parties see it through and complete the game, right? So in that case, a developer that shipped more projects in the past can signal lower risk. And there's other factors that the developer's end we can control. So definitely consider that risk balance when you are seeking a publisher. And the last point is just to look at the platforms and the geographies the publisher specializes in. Some only do consoles, some might do PC, Steam only, some might do one or the other. So do consider that, and it will make things smoother if you know what you're looking for. Okay, so here's the second point, which is I say technical collaboration, but it's definitely on multiple aspects. I just wanted to really share from the perspective of the developer, which some of the technical points are more like important. So when working with a publisher, right, like both parties do take a lot on our shoulders, and this doesn't really change regardless of if you have a publisher or not. But in my situation, although the Steam PC version of the game was done, there were new features needed for the console version. So for example, the Switch doesn't have a trophy system like the PS4 and Xbox One does. The publisher requested that I code an in-game achievement menu. So this was an additional thing. I didn't happen to code anything more than that, so I just spent like a couple weekends working on that. But they provided the technical resourcing in terms of doing some other things for getting it to run on the consoles and some console specific functionality they did. So we kind of split lists between the two of us. But it's possible that the like you might be caught off guard if, let's say, you weren't the developer and the developer had moved on from your project and you needed to find someone last minute. So I just mentioned this as a consideration. And once again, this there's a mandatory it depends depending on your agreement and what the responsibilities of your two parties are. And the second point also is kind of related. In this case, like a simple example is that the buttons for the console versions are all different, and a lot of screens and menus actually needed to be totally rearranged and like just looks different, right? Because what works on PCs on Steam doesn't work on consoles. So the publisher and I worked, I guess Ratalaika, which I worked with, they're really good at communicating these changes. Let me improve anything major that was changed. And I think the one key thing that I learned is just to not underestimate the effort of working with a publisher. And you might not be working with a publisher in this particular scope of, oh, porting it to consoles, but if you're sticking with the same platform as to what you're already planning, like stuff like this is still necessary to communicate between the publisher and you, the developer, or if you're the publisher. I know there's some people from, I guess, second project here. So that is one of the things that I learned. And once again, it's a mutually beneficial partnership. And from my perspective, I just want to emphasize how grateful I am to have a relationship that works. I mentioned before that when it works well, it lets the developer focus more on what they're good at. I don't need to worry about like marketing, media reach out, and stuff. So keep this in mind when you're chatting to a publisher, right? If your gut is saying that it seems that you'll have to do more of what you're not good at, and maybe they're not doing what they're good at, then it might not actually be a good deal for the two of you. So just like see what's like your complementary skills, and if that happens to work, or if it overlaps too much, it might not necessarily be a, a good deal where you two can bring a lot of different things to the table. So this last part might be kind of like something you're all pretty curious about as well. This is something that I was definitely very curious about before I actually got a publisher. And this is something like I couldn't read anything about on the internet. Yeah, so once again, I encourage you to see the relationship between yourself and the publisher as a mutually beneficial partnership. So, what is their portfolio? What is important to them? Since if you get to a contract discussion, there's a good chance that you have a decent fit. So, if you bring those things that are important to the publisher to the table, don't undersell yourself. There are sometimes good grounds to negotiate. I just have to say, for example, if you have provided a disproportionate amount of personnel, or if you've somehow lowered the risk level a lot. So, once again, this comes with a heavy dose of it depends. I just mean to really consider what you bring to the table holistically and don't undersell yourself. So, for this purpose, like once again, I wish I could just like share some numbers and then have it be, oh, this is the ground truth for all visual novels. But unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be helpful to anyone. The reason just being, I want you to know that you bring something to the table as a developer. Um, you're not like begging for a publisher. Like you two are in a mutually beneficial partnership, and don't undersell yourself as a developer, and just like don't necessarily go with something that does not make sense. Really consider what you bring to the table as well. So the second thing is kind of more of a in the weeds detail. There's going to be a lot of expenses that you might not be aware about, and I certainly didn't know about in the beginning. And once again, in my example, the publisher is extremely good at communicating these things, and we all talked it out beforehand. There was nothing unexpected here, but I'm just saying, just if you are entering a agreement like this, you need to just like keep poking, keep asking, keep the channels of communication extremely open. So for my example, the publisher covered the costs of like the personnel, the human hours required to get like ERSB ratings and those for other countries. So that costs money and that costs personnel, I guess, like salaries and stuff. So they were responsible for that on their end. They had developers and artists in house. This might seem obvious, like, oh yeah, it's their personnel, like they're paying for it, but there will be small details that I just hope you don't get just like surprised by if you enter such a publisher agreement or such a situation. Like in my case, once again, before finalizing any contract details, before signing anything, I asked like tons and tons of questions. I was like, oh, if we're adding new features, like what will I need to be responsible financially for, right? Like I made sure everything I knew. There was nothing out of pocket that I paid that was like unexpected, but you need to ask, right? Because sometimes no one's gonna be malicious. I mean, there are malicious people in the world, but um, we want to just like assume no bad intent. So if there's something that's just like catching both parties off guard, it might not be on purpose, but you just need to really, really don't hesitate to hop on the phone or a call, like not literally the phone, but like just like chat and just like keep asking and keep prodding at this. There was like tons of things I didn't know about the whole process, the ERSB thing being like the least of them, but there's just like a ton. And what I can recommend for basically the revenue share agreement and the expenses things is just communication. And I know we're slightly running out of time, so I'm just going to quickly go through this. The last one is absolutely important. Please, please don't cut corners on this. I was on the contract reading and everything. So I was lucky that in my case, the contract was in English, which is my first language. But I had experience reading through this type of contract from doing contract work previously. So if you have literally any sense of confusion, please get a professional pair of eyes on it. I can't stress enough how important this is. Like I took days to even like sign anything and had multiple calls, asked multiple questions, and just like before signing anything, make sure you discuss things and that you're happy, because this is an agreement that will just like go with you for months or years, and you don't want to regret it, right? So it's worth it to take a lot of time to think about that. So just to sum things up, um, yeah, look at the publisher's portfolio, see if you have good fit in terms of audience, in terms of what you bring to the table. The second point is just make sure what you're responsible for in terms of like your collaboration, who's providing like the technical expertise or like some other type of market expertise. The third point to keep in mind of is like this whole financial distribution and responsibilities and revenue share. Yeah, so hopefully you know more about what to be mindful for. So yeah, it's instead of things to know first, it's now you know. And once again, here's my mandatory reminder that there's a heavy dose of it depends. But I know that you'll be able to apply these principles to your own situation. So I hope that it'll help you make great decisions for your own games. And yeah, let's go keep making our games and maybe find a publisher if that makes sense for you. And yeah, thank you for everything. And here is my Twitter. Feel free to follow me or find the game on Steam, Nintendo Switch, and Xbox One and PS4. I was yeah, I didn't have space to put all those icons and stuff. But yeah, I thank you for the talk, and that concludes the talk. I'll Aggie, do I have time for questions?
Yeah, you got about 7 minutes, I want to say.
Oh, nice. Okay, I'm just like scrolling through the chat, but if you have any that you can just like read, then I'll just answer
Yeah,
them.
let's see if I can. Da, da, da. Oh, okay. So someone's like has a question. I coach indie studios in Finland to how to place themselves with the right publishers. Your presentation gave a new anecdotes to share. What would you do now compared to when? What do you do different compared to when you first entered a publishing partnership?
Ooh, yeah, that's a good question. So I think in my example, like I mentioned, I have seen that they have published games in Renpai and they have the technical capability to do that. So I'm talking about Rata Laika in particular, and this is for consoles. So I maintain the self-published status of Steam. So the revenue share is like different for Steam, which is like I just get all of it, and versus the console version, which is published, and then therefore we have our split. So but the question was like how to find it, but it's definitely like looking at their portfolio is how I found it. Like if you see any games that were published, like just like keep stalking and stalking like any publisher. Like literally I would go on Steam and I would just like, you know how you can see the developer and the publisher, like if you find games similar to your game, like literally anywhere, just like go stalk their publisher. Like that's what I did. And that's what I would still do in the future. Like it doesn't mean all my future games will be self-published or published by one party or another. I mean this also again is like heavily it depends. Like some people just become a developer kind of like under that umbrella of the publisher. This was not my case, so it does depend. But yeah, for me, I would suggest like for you for your situation, you can still find international publishers just by stalking their games or finding games and reverse kind of engineering like who published them. Yeah, that's what I would do.
So many people are just commenting, "Go stalk."
Yeah, my very professional recommendation.
Yep. Okay, let's see if there's any other questions out there. How many publishers did you pitch to?
Oh, actually, I don't know if this is like representative, but like basically like I think two or three, that's it. So I mean one of them got it, and yeah, it happened to work out because I think again like the whole stalking situation worked. Like Rada Laika published stuff that's not like anime girls, and they had like animals. So I mean, my game is a special situation. Okay, like let's say I had an anime girl game, which is one of my upcoming games. Like I would approach it slightly. Um, I guess I would probably have more options to be honest to pitch. Yeah.
I didn't even know there was like an animal focused publisher out there.
Yeah, yeah, no. Like they weren't focused on animals, but like I knew that they were like open to it.
Ah,
Yeah, their logo is a dog, like so I mean that helped a little, maybe. Yeah.
okay. Let's see. Anything else? Uh, all right. Let's see here. How are we on doing on time? Okay. So, Chris, we're going to continue on with publisher block with you. You set? Dun, dun, dun.